Hello. So I'm very happy to be here with you today in our webinars series of Women on Board. And today, Anne Frank is going to be the host and the moderator of our panel. So let's start with a couple of slides that I'd like to share with you about our webinar series and our work on the Women Leadership Forum of P&G alumni. So I really want to welcome all of you. We had very high subscription to this webinar today, and I'm sure that you will really enjoy it very much and learn from it a lot. So my name is Rebecca Keat, and I'm part of the Women Leadership Forum board and leading the board program for women that we will also launch in Berlin conference quite officially. So in the next slide, I'd like to share with you our vision of the P&G Women Alumni Forum. It's actually a forum, a women leadership forum that is created by P&Gers for P&Gers. And our vision is to be the most impactful and empowering professional women leadership network in the world, grounded in P&G values. So this is really something that we all share, the P&G values. This is something that makes us all feel like family whenever we meet, wherever we meet. And today is a very, very multinational audience, just like P&G, from all over the world. It can be from North America and from Western Europe and even from Far East and Middle East. So we're very, very lucky to have each other, and we can really create a very impactful network. Our mission is the Women's Leadership Forum Network fosters opportunities and enables impact for P&G women alumni worldwide. So through our activities, we are really fostering opportunities, leveraging the network, but everything is really in order to have an impact and to be in action. And this is also what you see in my background, impactful leadership in action. This is something that we really want to nurture and empower. So the key focus areas for 2025 are actually three very, very clear and very simple areas. One, we nurture leadership, and we have a great coaching program that is going on and that is very much successful in enabling people to fulfill their potential and to get to the next level. Two, we enable meaningful connections, and we do this through our yearly communication plan, and you'll also see it in Berlin conference this June. Three, we advance women professional journey with our board program. The webinar series is part of this, and our board program, I will present it in the next slide. So our board program is something new that we have started, and that is about creating a dynamic platform for experienced P&G leaders, alumni, board-seeking women, and available positions on board. So our goals are to enable the placement of women from the P&G network into board positions. We know that we really have well-rounded profiles that have great business experience, great international experience, a lot of marketing, strategy, finance, logistics, every area and aspect of the business. So it can also help boards to get the best candidates in the market and to help companies to bring more diversity to their leadership, diversity of gender, but also diversity of thoughts and diversity of experiences. And to drive women in different types of boards, including NGOs or startups or private companies, public corporations, large enterprises, and SMBs. So we really want to see us everywhere. The next slide, I really want to share with you what we're going to have in Berlin. So I encourage you to come from the 12th to the 14th of June in Berlin conference that is around the subject of navigating through uncertainty. And, you know, this is exactly the topic of our times today all around the world. Uncertainty going on. It can be uncertain in terms of culture, economy, war, etc. And the Women Leadership Forum is going to host a special event at the Apollo Hall of the Opera from 4 to 6 p.m. With drinks and finger food, and it will really be something special about empowerment of women, and you can see the place that is really amazing, and I'm looking forward to see you all there. And the next slide, which I believe is my last slide. Yes, it's about what we are today, the Women on Board webinar series. So this is actually our fourth webinar in this series, and the third of 2025. Last month, we had Deborah Bass hosting a very interesting panel about what our board actually looking for. And today we are going to talk more about the how. How are we going to get to these positions? And we will have in this series insights from board members, chairpersons, and headhunters, practical workshops on board roles, representations from all across the board, and perspective from global organization and male allies. So I really think it's a great chance to learn, network, and prepare for our journey to the boardroom. And next is actually to hand it over to Anne Frank. Anne Frank is going to be our moderator for the panel today. She's the Chief Executive of the Chartered Management Institute. You see behind her, CMI, the UK's leading professional body for management and leadership, with an international member community of over 220,000. She started her career at P&G. Of course, she's a very proud P&G alumni, and has held senior executive positions at Mars, Boots, Yale, and BSI. Anne is an expert in management and leadership in the workplace and speaks frequently in the media. She's a regular columnist for the London Times. In 2020, she was awarded an OBE for services to workplace equality. She authored Create a Gender Balanced Workplace and the Financial Times Guide to Management. In 2023, she was awarded the inaugural MEMCOM Outstanding Contribution Award for her work in championing the membership sector. So I'm very proud to be your friend, Anne, and to pass it on to you for a very interesting webinar. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rebecca, for that very thorough and wonderful introduction about the program. So without further ado, let's get to our wonderful panelists. I'd like to first welcome Ollie Cummings. Ollie is the CEO and founder of leading board search specialist New Role and the boardroom community New Role Plus. He hosts Enter the Boardroom, which is a top 100 Apple business podcast featuring boardroom leaders. He's previously been a private equity investor, where he was the youngest ever partner, and also has a lot of NED experience on startups, private equity boards, and family-run businesses. I'd also like to welcome Roisin Donnelly. Roisin spent over 30 years leading marketing and brand building throughout P&G in many different countries and sectors. Most recently, she was Chief Marketing Officer for P&G Northern Europe. Since leaving P&G, she's established a very successful board portfolio. Her current non-executive directorships include NatWest Group, Premier Foods PLC, and the Sage Group. And of course, prior to those, she's had several others. And last but not least, I welcome Francesca Excury. Francesca is a portfolio non-executive director. She has over 30 years experience directing across digital retail, FMCG, and leisure. She is also a senior independent director and the chair of a remunerations committee. Currently, the four boards she sits on include Air France, Henderson High Income, Hafner Energy, and the Association of Investment Companies. So what an incredibly accomplished and experienced panel. Let's get on to that first question, which, as Rebecca said, is let's focus on the how. How do you go about getting your first board role? What advice would you give to our many participants who are just perhaps starting out on that journey? Maybe you can share some of your own stories about how you landed that all-important first role. Roisin, let's start with you.
Thanks a lot, Anne. And my advice to everybody is start early. I had a great career in P&G. As Anne said, I was there for over 30 years. I did 15 different assignments, but in that time, I'd never done any job hunting. So when I looked at finding non-exec roles, it was very daunting to go through that process of interviewing for the first time in 30 years. So what I did was I built up board experience. Now, we're not ever going to be on the P&G board unless we're kind of a top of the company. So it's really important to get experience in other boards. And I joined the board of a university, I joined the board of a charity, and then I joined the board and chaired 2 industry boards. And that gave me great experience on what a board was and frankly, what a board wasn't, because you don't have people reporting to you and you need very, very different skills to be a successful board member. So as I was looking to leave P&G, I looked at a board career, and I looked at my first generation of kind of boards was really transition. So they were much more hands-on. I joined 3 companies, and a private equity, kind of a smaller company, and a company that had just IPO'd, different sectors and got different skills. They had 3 things in common. 1, I had great chairs who were my coach. 2, I had skills that those companies needed, and marketing skills, customer skills, digital skills. And 3, they were really great opportunities to get me to experience every part of a board. So sat on audit committees, remuneration committees, wrote terms of reference, wrote strategies and things as well. How did I get my first one? Well, a headhunter called when I was still at P&G, went through an interview process and met people. And what really helped was being passionate about customer, writing a CV that was much more board focused. So people don't always understand our P&G job titles. And the job title that Anne used to describe me was my external title when I was at P&G. P&G didn't have a chief marketing officer. My last title was something that nobody would understand, which was a kind of brand director, brand operations. But I got company permission. That was my external title that I used in industry bodies. But I decided my brand, I did a CV, and I looked really at leveraging my board experience to show that I had relevant understanding and that I could bring those boards something. But a headhunter like Holly, called me, I got into process, got my first one. It's very difficult to get your first one, and then they come along like buses. Once you are a board member, it's much easier to get other kind of similar things. But start small and get experience first of all. And
Great advice.
Check it for you as well. Yeah.
That's excellent advice. Thank you. Now, Francesca, how did you navigate this challenge?
Well, basically, the not to repeat what Rasheen said, the NED CV is crucial, but even more important was to develop a strong nervous system, because this is extremely competitive. There's a huge number of people at this hunting game. Everybody wants to be a NED, brilliant people like the P&G alumni, but you've got the whole of the army, the whole of the public service, the whole of the city, the whole of the tech industry. They're all at it. And some of them, most of them are pretty amazing. So if you've never been rejected in your life, now's the time to build a strong nervous system, because you will be. So that's the first thing. Also, be very clear what the questions you are the answer for, what the board questions you are the answer for, because that is your USP. You need to also demonstrate that you understand the work of non-executive directorship. So if you have some board experience, then you can leverage that understanding. But let's assume you haven't had any. Well, you can still do it, providing you demonstrate that you have a good understanding of what board work is. And there's courses out there. You can pay for it if you want, or you can go to, in the UK, I always tell people to go to the frc.co.uk website, which is like the official corporate governance website. And in their library, there is oodles of documentation that explains it extremely well, very comprehensively, and anything and everything you need to know is there. The other thing that I found was useful was to map your market, just like a normal market entry strategy. I ran companies for a good 11 years in sort of fast growth tech, digital distribution industries. And I could do many things because I had to do many things. However, there's no real necessity in you sort of blasting that out, because with all respects to headhunter, they need to box you in. And so the most important is to figure out what the market needs and where there's traction. So I sort of, I was the answer to things, to companies that were looking for growth in digital distribution, international development, consumer champion, whatever your vertical is, only focus on one thing, and then sort of send the different messages to several headhunters, which is the route I went through as well, and see which one comes back first. And at the time, in 2011, it was very much marketing. But last time I did marketing was in 1996, so I had to sort of mug up a bit on the knowledge. But that's what the market wanted. It was post-financial crisis. Suddenly, people woke up to that they needed board members on the revenue side of business, and marketeers are very well positioned for that. So then I pivoted my message to everybody else, and I repeated it, saying I'm the answer to any business that is seeking to grow their business through having a consumer champion and a digital expert on their boardroom. So you see what I mean? You need to sort of figure out your market, and then you may have to test it. And then once you know, you can double down on it.
So really what you've both said is it's a lot of work, and you really need to know yourself and develop some resilience. Now, Ollie, you place over 1,000 board roles a year. How does your community at New Role achieve success?
Yeah, I suppose before I talk briefly about that, I mean, my path into the boardroom was slightly different, and that I started as an investor director, so I got thrown onto boards as part of my day job, and actually often M&A for executives in corporates can create those opportunities. I then went on to investment committees, which actually is a good example. Often people sit on what are effectively boards. They don't realize they are in terms of internal committees. And then one of the businesses I tried to buy as an investor weren't interested in selling, but we maintained a relationship over time. And towards the end of my time as an investor, they actually asked me, it was a family business, and they asked me to join their board because we built a relationship. And I told them they should go and find someone who's much better than me, but they didn't want to, and because they had that trust that we built up over time. So I guess that's a sort of different path into that boardroom. Well, the thing I always sort of tell people when they ask me, how do you go about it? I sort of boil it down to 5 steps, which are reflect, develop, connect, engage, and persist. And I think some of those have already been picked up on. But I always start with the reflect, which is start with why. I think often it's assumed that you want to go into the boardroom. And actually, when you ask people, do you like reading lots of documents? Do you like sitting around having strategic discussions? Some people will turn around and go, oh my God, that sounds awful. No, why would anyone want to do that? Oh, and by the way, if you're doing it for a paid role, you're going to be paid significantly less than you'd be paid for an executive job. So this is not something you do for the pay. So I think starting with why is really important. And related to that, I had Tamara Box in episode 106 of Enter the Boardroom had this wonderful way of describing it, figuring out what's your thing. She'd been asked to go on the board role of, I think it was a big global animal charity, and her husband turned around to her and said, is that your thing? And she suddenly realized, no, that's not my thing, and then realized what her things were and went after that instead. And then just being really clear about how much time you have is all part of that reflection process. Then in terms of the development piece, I think the key question, on average, we have 30 applications per role. So these are hyper competitive, and you can assume all 30 of those people could do this role. So the question is, how are you going to stand out? And one of my favorite episodes from Enter the Boardroom was with Terry Duhon in episode 9, where when she first started going for board roles, she said, well, to get a board role, you need a board role. She was told that, and she was like, oh, how does that work? That sounds like a catch-22. And she talks through that episode about how she went about building the components that made her stand out, that transitioned her from being a trader and a sort of risk expert in a bank to sitting on the board of Wise, which is a sort of FTSE 100. And it's a sort of fascinating story, the way she goes about building that expertise. And in her mind, she didn't change much through that journey, but on paper, she'd built something that really helped her stand out as a thought leader. She'd written a book. She'd gone to teach at one of the leading universities in the world, and she'd gone and sat on one of the government boards, CHAPS, the UK payment system. I think you can also getting pro bono experience as part of that de-risks your profile, because it shows people you understand how to operate as a non-executive versus an exec. The third piece, connect, is really all all about maximizing your luck surface area. Andrew Tyler in episode 58 was brilliant about this, the way he goes about structured networking, and you just got to do that. We built the whole New Role Plus offering to make that easier because it's miserable networking, but you've got to do it and maximize that luck surface area. And I see a lot of people getting board roles by just offering their services pro bono. It depends what sort of organizations you want to work for, but often in the SME space, the mid-cap space, you can go and do stuff for free. Sarah Flanagan actually was started as a consultant and then built up a private equity portfolio on the back of that. So really connecting with as many people as possible. Fourth thing on there is engage. You already heard the start now. Most people think, oh, I'll leave it until I'm close to retirement. That's a mistake. Start now. And getting all the details right. I've heard about, Francesca talked about getting your CV and preparing properly for the interview. And then the last thing is that persist piece. I always refer to Admiral Stockdale, which to P&G would probably be a familiar character, given it was A.G. Lafley who wrote the book with him on Good to Great. And he says, never fix a time. Just know you'll get there. Don't assume a date. And everyone hates rejection. Some people hate it more than others, but being rejected is part of this process. So don't assume when you're being rejected that means you don't belong. Chances are you will be rejected. On average, people are being rejected at least 3 or 4 times for every role they do get. If you're getting to the shortlist interview stages, it's probably just a question of time before you get successful.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, very fulsome and wonderful advice from all of you. I think the rejection point is salient. I know Francesca and Rasheen have referred to that. Francesca thought she was getting rejected, but then ran into somebody else who said, no, I got 80 no's before I got a yes. So it is about hanging in there. But many of these board roles aren't advertised anywhere. We can't see them. We don't know where they are. So how do we find them? What steps do we need to take? Francesca, you're quite good at this. What are your thoughts?
So networking is very important. Even though I got them through headhunters, my network was the ones that reminded that I existed. And that's regardless of how well I knew these headhunters already. So networking with a NED purpose is essential. Make sure your network in new places, not a safe space like just alumni from P&G. Make sure you branch out and you sort of force yourself to get to know people outside your network, because they are your multiplier. They are also a safe space for you to test your USP. So to make sure that it's well articulated, if you say to people, well, this is what I'm the answer for, if they start frowning, you've got to go back to the drawing board and sort of articulate it a little bit more eloquently. Make sure you sign up to all the NED role sites, all the newsletter. Part of what I've got at the end is a slide with all of those. In the UK, they're very relevant. New Role, of course, is there, but there's many others. So then you start getting roles, getting access to them. You see where they are. You understand the vernacular. You understand the key skills that they are all looking for, and you can then use that to merchandise your experience and your CV, and demonstrate that you've got the evidence that you've got those particular skills on your CV. So it is quite important to at least see the roles, even if you don't apply to them. But of course, you need to apply to them to get the rejection starting and to get a lot of feedback through that. LinkedIn is hugely important. 100% of recruiters look at LinkedIn and what you do there. So make sure that your background is 100% complete and that you are connected to all the people that you know, all the recruiters that you have ever met in your life, and then look at who they are and which company they work for and who in those companies actually work on board roles. Make sure that you reach out to those people. And basically, I only connect to people that I have met. But make sure that everybody I know is connected to me, because it is work. And then you need to start publish thought pieces, forward helpful articles. These all build your digital footprint and send a reminder, very handily. The algorithm sends a reminder to the people you connected with. And hunting in packs, it is a bit strange, but to develop, I found that worked for me, which is to get together with a group of people, like the people on this network, but certainly Rasheen and I and Anne, we belong to WACL, which is Women in Advertising and Communication Leadership. And there I've set up a network with the help of wonderful committee members where everybody sends me the roles that they have received and they don't want. And then I spread them out to the network. You see what I mean? So there is this basically sharing the energies and at least have exposure to these roles so that you can then decide whether you apply for them or not. But in the meantime, you learn the vernacular and you learn the key skills and you refine your positioning.
Yeah, that's excellent advice. Rasheen, how did you find out about the board roles and what's your advice there?
Yeah, brilliant advice from Francesca. I think the roles that are advertised are getting hundreds of applicants. So there are places that just consolidate roles that are in the public domain, like Women on Boards in the UK, just looks at everything that's published. Roles on LinkedIn are getting 500 applicants. So it's really important to go to the roles that aren't advertised. And two things I did was kind of network with purpose with people I knew, people like me, people who were on boards, people I knew from P&G, people I knew from my charity board and other boards, and just told them I'm looking, drank a lot of coffee, had one-on-ones, talked to them. I also got introduced to headhunters, and there are specialist board practices. There aren't that many of them. They're there in every country. They're quite often completely different people from working in execs, although some people do verticals. And it's much better to be introduced by somebody who's an existing board member or someone they know, or even better, somebody who's an existing board member who gives them work because they use them. Because if you just mail in your CV, you'll go in their search engine, they might not see you. If you can be introduced, if you can sit opposite them and have coffee and do your brand pitch, they will remember you and you'll be top of mind. The fees, we've mentioned the fees are not huge. The fees that headhunters are getting for placing NEDs are relatively small compared to what they're getting from placing a CEO. So their commission's not great. So they're a little bit lazy and you've got to be top of mind. Now, P&G is great at advertising, but think about yourself as a brand and how do you advertise yourself, both in terms of reach, frequency and top of mind. What's your story? And the best thing that can help you are people sponsoring you, people advocating you, people opening that door.
Yeah, so that's a really good lead into you, Ollie, because one of the premises you founded New Role on was people introduced people to your network, which is now quite large. But how, you do have a number of listed board roles. Tell us about some of your thinking behind those.
Yeah, I mean, I think, a lot of the points Rasheen and Francesca have made, I completely agree with. I suppose I'd split it in your thinking, given on this topic of marketing, between your inbound and your outbound efforts. And in terms of your outbound efforts, there's a little bit of a question of the return on time invested. If you've got unlimited time, then you go spend that time, you meet with the headhunters. As Rasheen said, most, we are the largest player certainly in the UK by some distance. A big headhunter board practice might have 2 or 3 partners doing board roles. They might do 20 a year. So they're doing like maybe 40, 60 board roles a year. They're just not interested in talking to candidates, to be honest. They could fill them with their eyes shut. So your return on that time invested is likely to be quite low. But if you've got unlimited time, that's okay. We reckon we're less than 1% of the roles in the UK on the platform at the moment. So we have the roles that are on the core New Role site. And then in addition, we have the roles that we have on the New Role Plus site, which is our sort of premium subscription offering where we aggregate roles that we're not running on the platform. But even there, we think we're less than 1%. So most of those roles are still going through word of mouth. And it really comes back to, we'd like to change that. But for now, while that is still the case, the importance of your, what Isabel Fernandez-Mateo talked about in episode 87, so your sort of weak ties versus your strong ties. The opportunities often come from those distant members of your network rather than necessarily your biggest supporters. So really investing in that breadth of your network is absolutely critical.
Mm-hmm. Well, Francesca, you mentioned that too. Get yourself out of your comfort zone. Don't just talk to the P&G alums. But Ollie, there's so many different kinds of boards. In fact, all of you sit on many different kinds of boards. There's public, private, third sector. We heard from Rasheen that she started on some university and charity boards and worked her way up. Can you talk us through a little bit what's the the typology of board roles, and what advice would you give people as to how to look at those differences?
Yeah, we run this course as part of this pathway program we offer, where people get asked a series of questions, and we bucket the types of roles into A, B, or C. And depending on your responses to those questions, you're sort of encouraged to go down sort of A path, B path, or C path. And kind of under A path, it'll be typically unpaid board roles, which are the least competitive. So things like industry associations, sports bodies, schools, academies, and smaller universities, smaller charities where they got less than 5 million of turnover, public sector committees and panels, housing associations, smaller ones, and some NHS roles and the health service. And then the next rung up is where they're slightly better paid, or slightly more prestigious if they're in the pro bono space. So it might be things like non-departmental public bodies, bigger NHS trusts, pension trusts, building societies, local enterprise partnerships, larger charities, subsidiaries of FTSE organizations or sort of AIM-listed businesses, as well as sort of private and investor-backed in the sort of mid and small cap, as well as the VC end of the spectrum. And then at the most competitive end of the spectrum, you have the Fortune 500, FTSE 100, 250 type organizations, the large private companies, both family and private equity owned. I mean, interestingly, those family businesses are the most competitive. People seem, certainly on our platform, most engaged by those. And then the large and high profile government bodies, so something like the BBC, where it's a sort of highly prestigious role. In terms of some of the differences, besides pay and the level of competition, I would say, key differences relate to the amount of time commitment. Like a day on an NHS trust board is like they think of days in terms of 24 hours as opposed to 8-hour working days. So like it's completely different. Sorry, I just seen Francesca's spilled her coffee. The level of scrutiny and the nature of work involved, as well as the typical size of board. So typically the smaller organizations, the charities, SMEs, you get much more involved as an executive. You roll your sleeves up, you can almost get sucked into an executive role. Big university boards, you can have 15, 20 people around the table, whereas in a private equity board, you'll probably never have more than 2 or 3 independent non-execs. Public and third sector are typically more governance oriented, and when that's done badly, that means box ticking, while investor-backed businesses are typically more action-oriented. The government and NHS are hugely complex organizations that I think require a lot of patience. There was a wonderful episode with Anand Aital, who's the lead independent director at the Cabinet Office in the UK, in episode 59, who, I've always wondered why anyone would do one of those roles, but actually listening to him talking about that, was truly inspiring. And you could see, both the challenge and the sort of the personal satisfaction in doing something like that. Family and founder-owned businesses are unique beasts, in my experience, certainly, where you can end up being as much a therapist as a non-executive, which again can be both rewarding and frustrating. It's also worth considering in that mix advisory board roles, which I think actually have all the best bits of the board without the worst bits, which are the fiduciary responsibilities that you carry the same sort of risk as the executive, even though you're not involved full time. So it's also worth looking through that dimension as well.
Well, a huge overview there and lots of opportunity. Rasheen, you've had a lot of these different experiences. What are your observations about some of the differences, especially with regard to the how and what to expect?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a huge difference in culture and purpose between PE and public boards. And I've done a PE. I was involved in a UK kind of health and beauty retailer, which I was involved in the deal buying it, worked for 3 years with them, doing strategy, recruiting the people, putting everything in place. And it was very fast moving. I learned a huge amount, but it was also very short term. And it was all rolling up your sleeves to an incredible level. When COVID came along, they were threatening to call the stores. I had to call every government minister I knew and look at cash flow on a kind of daily basis as well. So hugely fast moving, very time consuming, but not something that had a great sense of purpose. To me, where I found my space is I'm currently on 3 big public boards. And the great thing about big public boards is they've got a lot of resource, a lot of organisation is what we're used to in P&G, but a really good focus on purpose and culture. UK boards are responsible for the culture, making sure the culture is alive and kicking in the company. UK boards are also responsible for making sure that you're accountable not just for the shareholder who you represent, looking at the long term, but also for colleagues, for customers, for stakeholders and for the community. So to me, it's just a much richer experience. You have to have the right strategy, you have to have the right talent, you have to have the right purpose, and you're looking at the long term constantly. So to me, that's been the best fit. I mean, it is ironic that kind of, public boards are very like not-for-profit in the way they operate. And when I've worked in a private company, when I've worked in PE, they were much more kind of short-term, great learning experience, but a very different kind of culture.
Okay, and Francesca, you also have had a variety of experiences. How would you classify the differences and any similarities?
So, I agree with both Ollie and Rashid. There are different types of animals, and they fit different purposes. But if you want a portfolio career, I would, my approach is different, is to mainly diversify very much in terms of the beast that I play with. So I've got Air France, which is a massive, it's the French airline. And then I've got an investment trust, which is kind of mid scale. Then I've got negative EBITDA, but listed a decarbonization business in France. So that is like a roller coaster environment. And then I've got a membership association, a bit like the CMI, but for investment trust. So it's very different conversations. And I always remember one of our members, Stevie Springs, said, the ideal portfolio, if you have 5, you have 1 for status, 1 for money, 1 to give back, 1 to learn, and 1 for fun. And so, I've yet to, I've been at this for 14 years, but I've yet to be able to do this portfolio. But, it is worth looking at it. The one company that neither of you mentioned is the pre-IPO. And that is a very special beast. And I've done 4 of those, and it's not for the faint-hearted, but it is very interesting because often when you do your due diligence, you always have very out-of-date information, and in private company, you have 0 information. And so how do you do your due diligence? But at pre-IPO, it's the only time in the life of the company where you have access to the most up-to-date, perfect, and most complete and most robust set of information. So you can really do your due diligence very, very, very good, very well. So that is a very interesting experience. What then you have, trying to migrate this private entrepreneur environment mindset into corporate governance with regulation and reporting, and and there's a lot of friction at that level. And I quite enjoy the transition and working with leadership teams on that. So that is one type of company that you guys haven't mentioned, but I thought.
So another opportunity out there. So very rich landscape, lots of different opportunities. But of course, we've heard from both Rasheen and Francesca and Ollie that you started looking when you were executives. Now, Rasheen and Francesca, you are full-time portfolio. We have discussed in the past, generally speaking, are there some kinds of boards that prefer working executives versus those who are no longer working executives but are non-execs? Maybe start with Rasheen, because both you and Francesca are non-execs. What do you think?
The board needs both, but I think there are 2 reasons why they prefer a current exec. And that's, first of all, because, and when they say current exec, they really mean CEO or CFO of the total company. But one of the things is they want those skills. As P&G, we have got strange titles, strange departments, try explaining what you do in kind of IT or IDS, or in finance, you're only doing part of the job and not the kind of whole end to end. But you've got the sort of skills that a CEO or a CFO will have. We don't have strategy teams in P&G. You've all led strategy in your department. We have relatively lean people teams. My bank board has got over 1,000 people in the HR function, and we never had that in P&G. And so your people leaders, your organization leaders, your transformational leaders. So really look at what are the CEO and the CFO skills that you have developed in P&G, and really make sure that's clear on your CV. You don't put yourself in a box of the category you've worked in and the function you've worked in, because you're much bigger and broader than that. I think the second reason that people are looking for current execs is they think they're relevant. So we're in a really fast changing world. They say change has never been this fast, but it will never be this slow again. So you need to keep up to speed. So I left P&G 8 years ago. Kind of at that point, I was doing a lot of digital. I was doing e-commerce. I was doing digital marketing. I sat on a Meta board and did top to tops with Google all the time. So I've joined an industry board where I absolutely keep up to date. I sit in a board with the 25 biggest sellers of digital advertising. So we've got Google and Meta, Snap, X on the board, as well as Amazon, kind of Tesco Retail and so forth. And I keep up to speed. So I immerse myself in all the training. I'm doing a lot of AI training right now. So I'm still understanding what is a really fast changing landscape. You can't leave your exec role and hang up your skates and expect to be relevant 10 years later. You've got to keep working at it. But there's lots and lots of ways to do that today.
Yeah, that is excellent advice, and very, very impressive, keeping up to date. Francesca, what's your view?
So I completely agree with Rasheen. Once you leave a company where you no longer have an HR department to make sure that you've got training lined up for you. It is your personal responsibility to keep up to date and make sure that you understand what you need to be doing, both in, it's a T-shaped thing, both at that level, which is in the general management and all the new trends like AI, and your vertical, which is marketing or HR or CFO or whatever. And you just, it's your responsibility to keep up to date. But back to your question as to, what's best, sort of an experienced NED or a recent exec. Well, you're right, you need both, but the majority of board members are, sort of career non-execs. That's the population. Having said that, they will, and they do that because it's safe. It's safe to hire somebody who's already been a non-exec, but they will make an exception, and that's for a recent executive, because the fact that your recent executive experience will be useful, because it de-risks and it brings lived experience into this boardroom where the majority of the members have been out of executive work for many years. And so it is worth trying, whether you're just about to start your NED career, but leverage your executive skills.
Yeah, excellent advice. Well, Ollie, I'm sure you have both career non-execs and execs in your network. What differences do you see?
So I fully agree with the points that have already been made. I think people are often talking about, there's room for both. People are often focused most on that recency of experience and the currency of their experience. They don't want someone who's been out of the workforce for 20 years. One of the benefits I sometimes hear board members talking about of having execs on their board and chairs talking about is that they're forced to focus because of the time constraints. So they don't bog the board down with detail that sometimes non-execs who have more time can do. It's also easier for a board to get a handle on what an exec has done and what they will bring. Whereas because a non-exec is part of a collective, it can sometimes be harder to get that handle on what's the specific value they will bring to the board. So that's the advantages of the exec. The advantages of the non-exec, I think, it's obviously that bringing that portfolio perspective. They can cross-reference, that they have the time to invest. So I did a podcast recently with a private equity portfolio manager who has 250 non-execs that they manage, and said that is one of the two things that is the single biggest predictors of success, is how much time people are investing in the role. And as a non-exec, you can do that. And there's some interesting data actually that shows execs with more than one non-executive role tend to start underperforming in their executive role. It depends a little bit on the stage that the company's at, and the data's not entirely uncontroversial, but certainly there is a suggestion of that. Non-execs obviously understand the non-executive role, but you can get an exec who's done a non-exec who's done that. The advantage of non-execs is also that they've scratched the executive itch, especially you'll hear that from chairs often. When they get someone on their board who still actually wants to be an exec, that can be a real pain. Whereas not people who've gone non-exec have decided, that's not for me anymore, and they're quite happy to step back. You don't have the conflicts of an executive role, especially those, in certain types of organizations. It can be very difficult if you've got an executive role. And then, as I touched on, you don't have the distraction of an executive job. You can really invest that time.
Sure. Well, that experience, we had that last week, the noses in, fingers off. Yes. Yeah, so you don't want people scratching their executive itch. So my last question, and this will be a little bit of a rapid fire because I know we'll have lots of questions for you all, and I want to give our audience time. Once you're on the board, what makes a good board member? So could you give us just briefly your rapid fire top tips? And Ollie, I'm going to start with you.
So I have two elements to this. The first is do no evil. And that sounds like a low bar, but the sad reality is most fail to hit this board. Most boards are dysfunctional and are not only not adding value, they're being destructive. So that's your first goal. If you want to aspire a bit higher than that, it's about driving two things, performance and conformance. On the performance side, this wonderful thing with Lisa Gordon in our live podcast the other week, where her advice was ask questions like Michael Parkinson, not Jonathan Ross. So really ask questions to really understand the problem rather than tee up your response. Build and maintain the wisdom and expertise but also have the ability to apply that to new situations. Providing the support and the challenge. Most people spend too much time on the challenge and forget about the support. Understanding less is more, something I always fail to do, but listen more than you speak. Someone who invests the time, going back to my point earlier from that private equity portfolio, people who make their network readily available, people who are humble and selfless where it's not about them, people who are very good at seeing the wood from the trees, so able to step back. People who understand what the executive needs, sitting back and asking that question, okay, what would be most valuable for you to get out of this session?
People so this is becoming a very challenging list.
It's not an easy role, and I mean, I'm almost finished. I think the sort of two other things on that performance side are just being proactive. Don't wait to be asked. Too many board members sit there and wait to be asked. And then the other thing is making sure the board runs well. Too many people assume that's the role of the chair, but actually as a non-exec, you can play a really important role. And then on the conformance side, I think it's being light touch, that it's trust but verifies and leverages what's already there. There are lots of non-execs who go and ask for a whole load of stuff that isn't already there.
Okay, super. Thank you. Francesca, your top tips, please.
Okay, so, building on Ollie, ask good questions, ask killer questions. That is what will make you a really good NED. You need to be intellectually agile, socially savvy. You need to be curious, interesting, and have independence of thoughts. And remember, it's chemistry. It's a team sport. So, you are signing up to 6 to 9 years. So it's a bit like marriage. You need to make sure that you respect the people sitting around that table, because otherwise it's really painful.
Great. Thank you, Francesca. And Rasheen, to finish us off, your top tips.
Only two things I'd add, because we've got a great list already. One is diversity of thought. If the board all agrees, it's adding no value at all. And so you really need to bring diversity of thought, which means you've got to understand, you've got to read, you've got to learn, you've got to bring your external thing. And then the other thing, which isn't always in the boardroom, sometimes it's before and after meetings, is coaching. It's a lonely job being a CEO, and every board member and every board I'm on, I am a coach. And I spend a lot of time really, really kind of coaching the executives to be their best, helping them develop, helping them with adversity, helping them take tough decisions and help them go into the unknown. So every board member is also kind of an exceptional coach.
Well, that's an amazing array of advice, and the amount and quality of practical information on this webinar is truly astounding, and it's wonderful that it's recorded because I know we'll all want to be looking at it and listening to it to make sure we extract the maximum value. But we have questions. And our first is from Lisa. She says, do you have any top tips on how to adapt a career resume for board roles? Or are they the same? Now, we already know they're not. Rasheen, you addressed that. Maybe I'll field that one first to you.
No, a board CV typically has got two sections. One is your board experience, and then the other one's your executive or your broader experience. And board experience has got to be kind of things that are relevant to the board, running the strategy, running the P&L, looking at change, looking at M&A, the different things. Ideally, they're from boards. You know, as Ollie said, you can mentor startups, you can get involved in different things, but they've got to be board skills. And that's the toughest one when you start with. That's relatively thin. And then I do a different CV for every role. It's got to be, you're the perfect fit for this role. And I learned that. I had my CV, I had my board CV, and then I was sitting in an interview with a headhunter, and I didn't even recognize my CV. I'm busy looking at it. And she just put down all my health experiences because it was a healthcare role. I mean, there were lots of things I'd done and over my career, but that's all it was. And so whenever you're up for a job, then absolutely tailor your CV so you are the perfect candidate for that role. And whether you're dealing with a professional like Ollie or a bot on LinkedIn, make sure that you are coming top. It's perfect.
Okay,
match.
That's great advice. Ollie, I have to ask you, your view on this. Can we just feed our CV into AI and say, do me a board CV, or would you suss that one out?
So I probably wouldn't, but the team would. They definitely are spotting that, which is interesting. Ultimately, you know, in my mind, this is a marketing document, and you know, people are spending alarmingly little time reading it, you know, a chair or a board member. And so it's a little bit like if you're creating a web page or any other marketing document, you know, you've got to get the key points up first, point evidence analysis, like what do you bring, what evidence have you got that you bring that, and how is that relevant to the organization you're applying for? So I think it's easy to sort of turn a board CV into a dark art that requires sort of, you know, snake oil or whatever to solve it. But I think it's really quite simple.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Now, Francesca, the question here is from Emmanuel. I'd like to direct it to you. What are the most common misconceptions aspiring NEDs have about the recruitment process?
Well, when I was an executive, I've only ever applied to roles I could get. Here, you're going to have a lot of rejections, and you know, I mentioned it at the beginning. It is hugely important that you develop a really thick skin, and you know, you get rejected, and you need to demand from the recruiter or whoever replies to you to give you some feedback you can do something about. Now, I have to say, I have. I was telling that I was getting so many rejections that I was just really finding it very painful. It took me 25 rejections before I got the first non-executive role. And I only mention this because I then asked this other woman who has the most amazing portfolio, and she says, "Oh, that's nothing. I had like 80 plus rejections." So I'm like, "Oh, well, that's pretty cool," you know. And it's very competitive. And then when I go back and check, like, who got that role, and they're awesome, you know. So what are you going to do? You just have to keep applying. Don't take it personally. See if you can get sub element that you can use to your benefit to be able to pivot your USP, or to reorder some of the points that you have on your CV to your benefit. You know, just use the process to learn and to develop your proposition.
Sure. And Rasheen, you mentioned earlier that one of the misconceptions is this is easy. Is that a misconception that you think is too widespread?
Absolutely. And people think they're looking for one skill. Every board's looking for a generalist, no matter what it says on the description, that you've got to be an overall board member and good at everything. So don't just focus on one thing. Yes, the T's a great one. And then what other things are they going to need in the next couple of years that are not even on the spec? So one misconception is, you know, you tick all the boxes, you should be a shoo-in. What else have you got that they don't know they need yet?
Yeah. And Ollie, I'm sure you deal with members who, like Francesca's stories, have had multiple rejections. What are they getting wrong in the recruitment process? What advice would you give?
So I suppose there are a couple of, I mean, sometimes we get people assuming it's AI, which, I wish we had more AI, but there's less AI than people think. And anyway, I suspect the strategy, as we saw with sort of Google search words, is it's better to create for a human, because AI will catch up anyway. There's no point trying to word stuff. I think people often fail to understand the difference between the fact that they can do the role and that there are other better people out there than them. Just because they can do the role doesn't mean they're the best person for the role. And then the other assumption that you sometimes see is people assume the recruitment process is flawed because they're brilliant, therefore the process must be wrong. And I would say the sort of strongest candidates actually do the opposite. They assume they haven't got something and they're looking to learn from the process. So that's, I would say, quite a common assumption.
Great, thank you. A question from Helen. How feasible is it to do a NED role when you're still in a busy corporate job? Do you see people struggling with this? Ollie, you mentioned you had some data on this about execs and board roles. Remind us what that was.
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole conversation on this in the Neural Plus community. I think the answer is it depends from the research I've read. If you're an executive of a company that's going through a major restructuring or an M&A process, you probably don't need the distraction of a non-exec role. If you're sort of cruising market leader, you've been in place for sort of 10 years, then actually it might be enhancing to what you do. But certainly I would counsel people against doing more than one, although the proxies allow you to do 2 to 3.
Sure. And Francesca, have you seen people that on the boards you're on in busy exec roles struggling to participate and contribute well?
No, not really. I mean, a lot of what goes on the board is very dependent on the quality of the chair. So, if you are going to choose a board and you have the luxury to choose a board, choose one with a really good chair. But no, I mean, the contribution is not any harder for somebody who's got an executive role. But I agree with Ollie. I think one non-executive role at the same time as the exec role is completely fine. And even if at the beginning you thought that you couldn't do it, you actually can. Many people do. And it's very good for both the company where you work as an executive and the non-executive board position. So it is, I would not hold back on that. Because you only can do one well, I would be careful which one you choose, because it needs to be good, it needs to be worthwhile. But definitely, if you can and you have the opportunity, especially because it's so competitive, I would go for it.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to end on this last question because of our audience. It's P&G alums. So Rasheen, for you, why do P&G alums make good board members, and are there any watch outs?
I mean, I think the 3 things that P&G bring are kind of great leadership. No matter what function you are, no matter what level you are, you were recruited because you were a great leader. And leadership is having an idea, kind of getting people to follow you and making it happen. And every P&G person kind of passed that test to get in, and passed that test kind of every year to stay in. So great leadership. Great strategic thinking. So we measure thinking. We don't have a strategy department, as I said earlier. You are great strategic thinkers. And thirdly, you're great people leaders. You've developed people. You've kind of trained people. You've coached people. You're working up and down organization. And there are 3 fantastic skills that you can bring to any board. I think the watch out, I mean, for me, the big watch out was I was a P&G lifer. I didn't have that breadth of experience, and working in other boards has given me huge breadth of experience. So don't wait too long, and don't expect not to sell yourself that the P&G name is both a positive and it's a negative. People know you're smart, you're strategic, you're a leader, but they're also looking for more.
Okay, well, that's fabulous advice. Thank you to all of you. Now, I know that Francesca and Ollie, you have resources, very practical resources to share with our community, and I'd like to give you just a couple of moments to do that before we close. So I'm going to hand to Ollie first to take us through, and he'll hand to Francesca.
So I think this is going to be available to people afterwards, but very quickly, there are a couple of things that you can do from the Neural platform free. So one is to start following the Enter the Boardroom podcast. Not because of me, but because of the amazing guests we're lucky enough to get, which have included people like Anne. The second is to register on the New Role platform, where you can get access to those board roles. And then the sort of two sort of paid offerings that we have is the New Role Plus community, which makes a lot of the networking, the learning much easier. We have these pathway programs helping people get their first board role, as well as those who've got their first board role build out their portfolio. And then the other interesting newer thing that we started doing are these pop-up boards, which you can host as an executive to deal with a challenge you're facing. But it's a wonderful way to get experience of a board and see how other board members operate, and also start to build that network with them.
Brilliant. And a couple of those first two are absolutely free for our alumni community. So please do take advantage of them. The paid offers are excellent as well. Francesca, over to you.
Yes, for me, it's a laundry list of websites and where you can sign up for either newsletters, or you can go and consult their jobs board. You know, some of it is paid, some of it is not paid, some of it is government public appointments, some of them are for trustee, non-for-profit. But the point is, have a look, see what floats your boat. You know, once you start getting them into your inbox, you will feel just a lot better, because you're no longer wondering, where are these roles? At least you've got some that you can look at and consider. So, you know, all these are free to consult and to apply. Make sure that when you have to load up your profile, just take care. Make sure that, you know, it's a bit like the more you put in, the more you get out. So sort of try to be as complete, and it may take some time, but it's completely worth it, because then the algorithm will serve up the much more relevant propositions.
So thank you, all of you again. These are fabulous resources. They will be circulated along with the recording of this incredibly practical, rich session. A huge thank you to all of my panel members and everybody who joined us. And I would love to hand back to Rebecca, who's going to close us off for today. Rebecca. Oh, Rebecca is on mute.
Oh, so I was thanking you all. That was really fabulous and very, very interesting. I'm sure everyone learned a lot. I learned a lot. And I really thank you, Anne, for leading it, Rasheen, Ollie, and Francesca for your insights. I also want to thank Luann Eckert. She's the chairman of the Women Leadership Forum board, and we are very thankful for her support and encouragement in doing all those initiatives. So we will see you all in Berlin, and stay tuned. You have a lot of resources that are very useful, and links that you see here in the comments, and that we will share also in the recording and the follow-up email. Thank you so much.
Brilliant. Thank you, everyone.